Okay, I believe we're live. I'm here with Dan Eriksson of the Free Sweden Project. He spoke remotely at our International Intentional Community Conference this past January, and I was very impressed with what he has going on. Obviously, we support any intentional community movement in the Western world, and Sweden, especially, is in dire need of it. And so I think Dan is doing what needs to be done, and he deserves our respect for that. So, Dan, if you want to introduce yourself for those who are not yet familiar.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. Well, I'm Dan Eriksson. I'm 43 years old. I have a long history in the Swedish nationalist movement since my late teens, and after 20 years, we decided something else had to be done instead of what we'd always been doing: party politics, street activism, all of the things I think most of the audience are well aware of. So that's when we founded the Fria Sverige, Free Sweden in 2017. And I hope to be able today to explain a little bit about why we are building our community the way that we are doing, and what we have done right, the mistakes we've made, and why I believe that this is the only way forward for white nationalist people.
All right, good stuff. So, when exactly did Free Sweden get started, and what exactly is it?
So we launched in November 2017, but of course it was something that we had discussed for a long time leading up to in both political parties, and I've organized some of the biggest demonstrations in Sweden. And I was getting quite tired of it. It was really like running into some kind of hamster wheel. Nothing was really happening. So what we realized was that, first of all, the demographic situation is what it is. It makes democratic political change almost, or well, I would say impossible. So even if we would get like 70 or 80% of the Swedish or the white vote in Sweden, we still wouldn't have a majority in the parliament. And looking at all the nationalist parties the last 50 years, nobody has gathered more than a few percent of the votes. So it really felt like waste of time. A few years leading up to 2017, we had a very successful podcast and live show where we talked a lot about these subjects. But still, we were saying, like, why is nobody doing what has to be done? Until we realized, okay, if it's gonna get done, we have to do it ourselves. So we launched Free Sweden with the intent to first raise money to be able to buy land and property. And the first thing that we wanted to buy was a big headquarters and meeting hall, because it's always been a big problem in Sweden for nationalists to raise money to rent a place to have conferences and events, and I think it's the same in the United States. So you always had to have these secret meetings. It was really hard for new people to come to conferences because it was always this long process of verifications and secret meeting points and so on. So that was our first goal, was to buy a property where we could hold big gatherings. So we raised around $150,000 and bought our first property, and then invested a few $100,000 more to renovate it and get it into the great shape it is today. And this was really like the starting point. So then everybody knew that, okay, the Free Sweden, this is where we are having our headquarters. People started moving into the area. We started building communities in that way, building businesses together, and a lot has grown just from that first property. That's still our main headquarters.
Okay, exciting. So, what exactly is the model for membership? How does one join the Free Sweden movement? What does that involve?
So we do have different tiers of membership, so anybody can join. If you become a member, a paying member, it's like $10 a month. Um, it's mostly to support what we are doing and get some inside information, get invited to a few big events every year. But the next tier, I would say, is more where the real stuff is happening, and that's people who wants to be a part of building these intentional communities. So we now have this what we call Svenskarnas hus, the house of the Swedes, which is our headquarters in one area in central Sweden, and we also have one house in southern Sweden. And around these houses, we build our communities. So if you want to be a part of that community, you also have to be a builder. You have to be contributing with something. Maybe you're not a carpenter or a plumber, but there's always something you can do to help. And that I would say is like the most important part of the organization. Of course, without the backbone and all the members who are supporting financially, it wouldn't be possible. But if it would just be raising money and having online conferences, it would be nothing different than all the podcasts and live streams that are available online.
Yeah, of course. So how busy are these houses? Are people always there? Or...
So the headquarters, the first house that we bought has gone through a few different phases. We used to have a coffee shop that was open daily. It's quite hard to keep that up financially because it's in a small village and so on. So now it's mostly open a few days a week. And then it's mostly members there and people who are interested. But we also try to be open a few times per year to everyone, and especially to other people living in our village. And then we have our big summer fest every year. We have some other traditions. This coming weekend, we have for us a very special tradition. It's connected to the All Saints Day, but we have created our own tradition out of it. It's in memory of our forefathers, we call it. So there's a ceremony and a dinner that we have every year. But this is of course for members only. So I would say it's quite busy. I would hope that I would get more busy. The last few months, some other nationalist groups have rented it for free as well, and I'm very happy about that because when I got into nationalist politics in my teens, we had nowhere to gather. There was really hard for us to rent a place. So if we can help young guys and girls to have a place to meet, that's perfect.
All right. When you say you build the communities up around these common houses, effectively people are relocating to the area, preferably within 15 or 30 minutes, or what's the idea?
Right. So you can say there is like a real hardcore inner circle that lives, within 3 minutes of the house, in the same village. But most people live in, I would say, within 30 minutes of the house. Depends on their personal situation, I would say, and what is available on the housing market. We have also had people buying up land just for preparation for what we want to build next, or how we can develop the things in this village. So that's one way that people are moving there. The other way is, of course, that we are very active in this local community. And when we opened the house early 2019, a lot of people were skeptical. Of course, the media were writing their usual hit pieces. And I would say it took 1 or 2 years before the locals realized that we were the good guys. And we did that by just, always trying to help, always be ourselves, be friendly. And we started taking over. The thing is, in Sweden, the countryside is really, run down in many places, and the government don't care about it. They have to focus on the big urban areas with where all the migrants live. So in the rural areas, you have a lot of problems with like potholes in the street or things that aren't working. And sadly, because Sweden has been a social democratic state for 120 years, people are always waiting for the state to fix it for them. We went there and said we will fix it, and we started repairing the streets. We started, being good members of the community, which of course also changed how people looked at us. And it's important to stress that we didn't do this as a strategy. We did this, of course, and still do this because we want to have a great community where we live. My children are growing up here. I want to have a great community around me. So it's not that we are doing this as some political strategy to get people to like us. It's because that's what we want out of a local community. And after a few years, people were starting to reach out to us. So, for example, when somebody sells their house in the village, they often come to us first before going to the real estate agent and ask, is there any of your members who want to buy the house? There are other local festivals, like small festivals, where I think it took 2 years, and then the organizer came to us and asked, "Can you be responsible for the barbecue? Can you be responsible for this and that and so on?" So we became an integral part of the village, and tried to bring something positive into the community as well.
Yeah, that's great. So you're not trying to do this as a political tactic, but as a consequence, you're improving the area. People see that. Have you gotten a lot of members from the local area?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the second way that we are building the community. So people are moving there, and we are also, in one way, recruiting locally. And we try to not be pushy at all. It's not like that we're going around knocking on doors and saying you should become a member. We put up some posters and stuff like that when the house is open and welcome everybody. Sometimes we hand out leaflets just with information that on Saturday, there's coffee and cake in the House of the Swedes. You're welcome. And when people are there, there's of course some forms to fill out if they would like to become a member, but we really don't want to be pushy about it. So I believe when people are ready, they will come to us. So we have to build, and we have to show what we stand for, and then I believe, and that's what we have seen as well, people will come to us organically.
Hmm. If someone's curious, is there one big annual event that they should check out, or what's the best place to start?
Absolutely, I would say the Summerfest, which is the first weekend of August. That's our main event, which is also open to the public. And it's a full day and evening filled with games and fun. And it's a lot of children. We have a strongman competition. There's of course music and some speeches, but we try to keep it quite non-political, in one way, because it's more about a great celebration, together. And then also in November we have more internal, but we always celebrate on the birthday of our organization. So this November we turn 8 years old, which we will celebrate, of course.
That's awesome. Can you share membership figures?
Sure. So since we launched, we have had around 3,500 people who had become members. Around today, around 1,100 are still active, which is something we are working on because it's a big, what's called in English, a big churn, or it's a lot of people who disappear. We have a
Mhm.
monthly membership. It means that a lot of people, they are curious and they come in for 1 or 2 months, and maybe that was nothing for them, or they don't really see how they fit in the organization. But it's a bit over 1,000 members at the moment, which to say that we are 7 million Swedes. It's a quite a good figure, and bigger than any nationalist organization in Sweden I've been in before. So um, quite happy with that. Of course, you could always wish for more members.
No, that's awesome. Those are very good numbers, even by American standards. So, uh, good for you guys, and I'm excited to see the progress. Moving forward. What does it look like, legally speaking, if you wanted to, say, develop some of that land that your members have purchased into an intentional community? Are you allowed to have communities like that, or?
Yeah, so there are some different legal ways to do it. Sweden has quite harsh anti-discrimination laws, so you have to do it in a special legal way to form an association, um, which then can, where you can discriminate who can become a member or not, and so on. Um, so you can't really build a gated community or stuff like that, or it's quite hard. I would say today we don't really need that, because just by being, a couple of families, I think we are like, I mean, in the region, or like in 15-30 minutes, maybe 20 families, a few 150 members. Just by being that many, we already control most of the village where our headquarters is located, and people naturally look to us as an authority. We did have a problem a few years ago, because there is like a rental apartment complex there, which is like 10 apartments, where the social services put some junkies in there, and yeah, they can live on the countryside in this village, which we were not very happy about, of course, and also the local people were not very happy about it. But we got in touch with the owner, and he could get them out, and now we control who can move in and who can rent an apartment or not. So even though we don't own it, the landlord always asks us before anyone new can move in, because, well, we are that powerful, at least in the village.
Well, great. What if the national government decided to settle refugees? They make an encampment. Is there any way that local communities in Sweden can veto that?
Um, Up until now, they could, but it looks like the government will change that to be able to force the municipality to accept refugees, so-called refugees. And in the village where our headquarters is located, there was a big migrant center before we got there. And of course, the people who live there doesn't have a very good experience of it. I don't think they would try to do that in our village, but if they would, I think we could organize some kind of I would say protest, but maybe some way to stop it. But right now, the municipality theoretically could go against it and stop some kind of refugee or migrant center, but I don't think the local municipality would do that, because they are run by a sort of left-wing parties, and then it would be up to us to do it locally in one way or another.
Okay, what's the role of the municipality in Sweden? Usually in America, the municipality means effectively the town or city or whatnot. So,
Yeah, so it's like a smaller region, and on the countryside it could be quite large, but not that many inhabitants. So I think in this municipality is called Töreboda. I think it's around 10,000 people or something like that. And it's the local government, and they are responsible for school, for elder care, for roads, and some other stuff like that, and also then for social services and uh, migrants, more or less. So they're quite powerful, and we have in our what's effectively our constitution, they are quite autonomous, but in practice they all just follow the party line. So we have the same parties on local level as on national level, and it's not like they have very much of their own will locally.
Right. Okay. By the way, we are doing super chats, so I'll post the link for Entropy. And if you have questions for Dan, go ahead and ask them there. We'll be splitting super chats, so I will send Dan half of whatever we raise. Um, yeah. So, how have you gone about trying to have influence in the municipal government?
So we have decided to not form a party, because we don't believe that's our focus. But we, of course, have good contact with local politicians from various parties. It would be natural for us to work together with something like the Sweden Democrats, which is a national populist party. They come from the nationalist movement in the 80s, but today they are more like something like Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, or maybe Reform UK or something like that. The problem is we did have a good cooperation in the beginning, before some anti-racist magazine was writing a lot about it, and how the local politicians from the Sweden Democrats were visiting our house and so on. And then the Sweden Democrats on a national level decided to forbid their local politicians to speak to us. So let's say like this, instead we have members who are not officially our members, but they represent different political parties in the local parliament, so we can have influence that way. We don't have a majority, of course. It's not like we can run the municipality, but we can influence it in different ways. We also have which is quite interesting, a lot of people who work in the local government, not as politicians, but as whatever it's called in English, I don't know, who feed us information and tell us what's going on. People who sympathize with us, without maybe showing it openly.
Okay. Any other organizations at the local level, like school boards or I don't know, volunteer fire department that you guys have gotten involved
Sure.
with?
We try to be involved everywhere. Some of the things it's best not to speak about publicly, because it's better to just keep it local in the village, in the community, to not create any problems. But we have, I would say, our members in all places where we could be represented. We are, of course, not there as official representatives of the Free Sweden. They are there as just local people living in this community. But we try to, as I said, to be a positive part of the community, and that, of course, involves voluntary work in different ways, like you said, school board, for example.
Hmm. What about education within the community? Is there a homeschool co-op? Are you allowed to homeschool in Sweden?
No, homeschooling is illegal in Sweden because you could give your kids the wrong ideas. So we have a public school in the village, which I would say, if you are 4 or 5 fathers who have your children in this school, you can have a lot of influence. And when I say that, I don't want people to misunderstand it as threat of violence or something like that. It's just that most parents are not very involved in the schools anymore. So if you are 4 or 5 fathers or mothers who are very involved in the school, you can have a lot of influence on it. But I believe the most important thing is what we are doing after school. So we have like the kids doing homework together, or you have a sort of homeschooling in the afternoons. And of course, there's always the responsibility of every family. I mean, every day when my kids get home, the first thing I ask them is, what did they teach you in school today? And you know maybe sometimes you have to set some things straight. um, but I think we have influence in that way. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's better than nothing. What
Mm.
about any extracurricular type programs? Do you get together for music for the kids or that sort of thing?
We have nothing like that yet, but it's really one of the things that we are looking into, how we can develop um, what we are doing locally. So we have, like in our house, we have also used it as sort of a, like an after school place, because we have like a pool table and ping pong table, and there's some things to do there, and there's nothing like that in our village. So we have it open like once a week for kids after school to just come and hang out and have fun. Of course, then it's not like we are talking politics with them. It's just being a contributing positively to the community. But of course, the good and nice side effect of that is that they get to know us, and they, when you get into our house, there's of course our flag, our symbols, our old kings on the walls, and just this feeling of pride and identity, which they don't get anywhere else.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds really nice, honestly. I don't think
You're
the
welcome to
same.
visit us.
Yeah, I would like to. I don't think the same exact model would do as well in the US just because we're so spread out. There aren't a lot of places where people can easily relocate and have an urban center where they want to visit. Most of our cities are terrible.
Mm.
Even like the larger towns are usually pretty mixed, and it's like that trade-off. If you want somewhere with good economic opportunities, you're going to have to put up with the demographic change that we're being subjected to. So what about that on a larger scale? Obviously, Sweden is further down that road among European countries of accepting migrants, and I think you're at like 75% actual Swedish now, right?
Yeah, it's quite hard to know the exact figures because it's illegal to have statistics based on race or ethnicity. So you can see like statistics on country of origin, and then you can see parents' country of origin, and you can try to puzzle it together and try to get something. But something like that, 70-75%. And it's bad. The good thing is Sweden is very segregated. I've lived in Germany. I've lived in Berlin. I've also lived in East Germany on the countryside. I've lived in Copenhagen in Denmark, and I would say Berlin and Copenhagen are much more mixed cities than Stockholm. Um, in Stockholm, the inner city in Stockholm is very white. So then we have like suburbs, which are usually, when you say suburb to an American, it sounds like some nice place, with nice white families. But in Sweden, or especially in Stockholm, a suburb is like the ghettos.
Hmm.
It's no-go areas, and it is very segregated, and that's a very very positive thing, because it means there are still places like where I live. You know, of course, it's not like 100% white, but I, I see I see non-white people not even on a daily basis when I move around. So it's you can always move to a white area, which can be seen as something negative for some people, because they think that the middle class can always move away from the problems and
Right.
keep voting for the old parties. And I see that problem as well. But on the other hand, I'm happy that white kids, Swedish kids, can grow up in Swedish areas still, and I think we have to change our messaging on how to reach these people, because I don't really like this attitude, and I've heard it from nationalists for decades. That we need to force multiculturalism on these white middle class areas so they realize how bad it is. But then in the end, there will be almost no areas left to fight for. Now we in Sweden, we have many areas still which are 95% Swedish, and that I think there's still a good chance that something can grow from these areas. Also in the Free Sweden, we have what we see will happen in the coming decades, and I would say even if you look as far down the road as 50 years, 70 years, next coming generations, is that the state will more and more pull back from especially the rural areas, which we can already see, but even more than that. And we will see that migrant clans and gangs will control even more areas, which they already do, but it's not that big areas or that many areas yet. But this will be the natural development what we will see. The question is, will Swedish or white nationalists control any areas in 50 years? Will we have anywhere to regroup? Will we have anything left to defend? If we hope for, multiculturalism in every area in the hope of waking people up, we will have no areas left to defend. All of Sweden will be a multicultural hellhole. So when I see like international alternative media write about Sweden, it's not that they are usually lying about Sweden, but of course the whole picture is very different. There are areas which are really bad. I grew up in one of those. I grew up in a suburb to Stockholm. When I started high school, I was the only Swede in my class. I was the only European in my class. And this was in the end of the 90s. That's when I realized I had to get organized as a nationalist. These problems have been here for a long time. Of course, they have been amplified the last 20 years, and especially after 2015. But there are still very, very nice areas in Sweden, and it's not like all of those areas are naive people voting for the old parties. If we look at voting for the Sweden Democrats as a measurement to see if people are at least understand the problems of multiculturalism, then most of the people voting for the Sweden Democrats live in areas which are dominated by Swedes.
Okay. Yeah. And what's the best party out there currently?
None.
Okay.
It's a very hard question. I mean, you have the Sweden Democrats, the national populists, who are now supporting the government, and we are very disappointed with them. Then you have a couple of micro parties, which you could of course say that they have a better political program, but it doesn't really matter, because you can have the nicest program in the world, but if you don't have power, it's just a piece of paper. And there is no way, I would say, for a so-called true nationalist party today to gain any electoral success in Sweden, and also in I would say in all of Western Europe, where you have this national populist parties who already dominate that market. That could change in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but by that time, demography will have changed a lot as well. So for me, the whole thing about political parties and running electoral campaigns, to me, it's just a waste of time and resources. And I've seen so many good men and women join these parties, given everything they have, all their time, energy, money, and then come out so black pilled, so devastated
Mm.
because there was no electoral success. And instead of continuing building on something, they fall out, they focus on something else in life, because they see that, wow, I put so much time and effort into this and it brought us nothing. I mean, I've done the same thing, and that's why we want to do something different. So what we are doing now is building a foundation that coming generations can continue building on. Um, if you have a political party with no electoral success, you are just burning money and
Mm.
people,
Right.
essentially. But if you invest that money and those people into building communities, in buying a property, building businesses, becoming more and more independent from the state and from you know the hostile parts of Sweden, then there's a return on investment that you can't see in a political party today.
Oh yeah, of course. People, if they keep trying the same thing and fail every time, eventually get discouraged.
Mm.
And it's not necessarily a courageous thing to go and just throw more meat into the churner when it comes to that national political system. I'm sure there are other ways, and I'm sure you're exploring those other ways. But I think people need to see the alternative. As time goes on, as more areas in Sweden are, multicultural, um, people will see even more tangibly the effect that that has on quality of life. And meanwhile, your communities will exist, and they'll be a bastion in the midst of that. And I think people have a hard time kind of visualizing and imagining. They need to really see concrete images. And we see enough of the bad images. We see images of migrants attacking young girls and things like that. Those are shared on X, but we don't necessarily see as much on the positive side, and not something we can relate to and say, this is something I can go join. So I was going to ask, guys, share the stream, but before I ask that, do you want a lot more attention on your movement? Do you think that would help you? Or do you think a slow and steady kind of more or less covert approach is better?
We believe much more in slow and steady. Of course, if we would get like 10 millions donated tomorrow, it would help a lot. You can realize a lot more things. But we don't really need the attention. We need to find the right people, because what we have seen these 8 years is that you can raise money. Uh, it's not that difficult. It's possible, especially if you have something to show that you have managed to do something before. But to find the right people, the key people, the who will, be able to also create something from this money, to build the house, to run the house, to run a local organization. That's really the tough part. So um, today we are more focusing on polishing the jewels, in our membership. Trying to educate and bring forth the coming local or even national leaders of the movement, and trying to help them to not make the same mistakes that we made when we were young or younger. Not that old. But and try to find the right people, because one of the biggest mistakes we made from the beginning, because we have this open membership, is that we were not intolerant enough. We tolerated almost everyone. Of course, there were some limits, but if people wanted to move to the area and said they wanted to help, we believed them, and we didn't care that much about their history or what kind of persons they really were. And that has costed us a lot of energy, because this is always for for a new movement, which are looking for, especially for people who can work on a voluntary basis, often the first people to join are the idealists and the people who have nothing to lose. And the people who have nothing to lose, there are of course exceptions, but usually there's a reason for that. And we have done some bad recruitments, which has taken a lot of time and energy, which we would rather have spent on building. So now we are more focusing on trying to find the right people who are already a part of the organization, or maybe are coming in here right now. We are not. We have stopped talking to the media, for example. In the beginning, we said yes to every interview. We had documentary teams filming our meetings. We tried to be as transparent as possible, and we got a lot of attention. Of course, that meant few more members, few more donations, but we didn't really reach the right kind of people, and it also brought some negative attention, which we were not interested in. I think you're well aware of the mainstream media not always portraying you in the best light or being totally honest when when they are publishing or cutting the interview. That's the edit is not always the most honest one.
Yeah, I've started recording everything on our end as well, so that if things are deceptively edited, there's at least a record of that. So yeah, Dan has a lot of experience, a lot more than most people in our spheres, how to actually vet new members, how to run an organization. So he has a lot of wisdom that he can share. I encourage you guys show some support and ask questions of Dan in the entropy. So I'm posting that link once again. So what, I guess, have you actually changed as far as your application process and how you vet members in light of this? Because it is a very well-known issue. The people who have time on their hands, who have nothing to lose, they're the first to show up. But you've overcome that somehow. So what have you actually changed?
Well, we have become much more intolerant. Mm-hmm. And if somebody says I can help, I would like to move there, or I count me in, we will make sure to have an interview. We will look up criminal records. We will look at their family situation. For example, if there is someone who has kids with 3 different women and has contact with none of them, is usually not a good guy. Usually, there's always exceptions, but you have to look at these kind of things and be, as I said, intolerant, and say that I'm sorry, but we can't have you in a key position in our organization. We have to look for someone else, and rather build slowly, but with and build a good sound foundation, than to try to rush something that will not last for a long time. So be really careful with who you let into key positions. So as I said from the beginning, we have an open membership. Anyone can become a member, and just by becoming a supporting member, we don't, anyone could be a supporting member. We don't control them at all. But as soon as you want to have some kind of position or move to our communities, we will go through a vetting process to minimize the risk that the wrong people get into our close circles.
What are the signs that you've learned to pick up on, besides fathering children with out of wedlock, multiple women? Just personality tells. When you meet someone, what are you looking for?
It can be quite complicated, because there are people who are very convincing at first, and they can have almost these kind of manipulative things going on. So it can be complicated, but of course you look at, as I said, family situation, like experience in life, and usually how much do they drink, smoke, do they uh, go to the gym or take care of themselves in any way. There's many of these kind of things that together form a picture. And it's not like to join us, you have to be some kind of superhuman or you have to be perfect in every sense. But usually there are a few boxes you have to tick to really fit in to to be a part of this. And it's hard to say like one or two things that always has to be in a particular way. And I think the personal meeting is really important. We have gone from chat to telephone to personal meetings, because there is something when you meet in person that also happens.
Right. What about exceptional qualities that will tell you this person will be an asset in actually helping to grow and manage the organization? We've noticed that former military people are often very high quality and disciplined and willing to volunteer and spend the time. People who in the chats are trying to cool down disagreements. I don't know if you have online chats very much. We have shut down our general chat for the PMA for Return to the Land, because just like the first people who want to show up in person don't have much going on very often, the people who spend all day in the general chat are not necessarily your highest human capital. So we've shut that down. But we do notice when people try to intervene and keep the tone positive. So that's a tell that, this is a person you want to elevate and encourage. So what are the signs that you've found?
Yeah, and I would say also we have really good experience with people that have some kind of business background to run their own business. They show that they can take responsibility and manage themselves, and take on some things without getting too stressed about it. So we also have some former militaries who have been good recruitments, and in general, people who have a stable background. It sounds almost obvious, but the nationalist movement in Sweden, I guess in the States as well, has been sort of had a problem with a lot of unstable personalities coming into the movement, and trying to keep them out has been key, really. And as I said, we have failed a few times, but we're getting better at it.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes, someone will look good on paper and they're fine online, but then you meet them in person and yeah, you find out there's a significant alcohol issue, or sometimes they just don't know how to get out of that ideological headspace,
Right.
and they can't like shut up about the Jews or whatever the issue is. It's like
Mm.
the focus at a certain point needs to be on us and how we're building our communities and what we're doing, not just about, here's what's being done to us. Like we all know, we've all gotten
Mm.
these talking points. And I think past a certain point, it's really not healthy to dwell on that stuff. That's why, in my opinion, movements like this, like yours and like Return to the Land here, are so important. It's a space where we can actually have our own culture. For me, that's really the purpose: is expressing our own culture, celebrating our own culture on our own terms, not in this kind of Schmittian us versus them frame constantly. So, how would you characterize, I guess, the overall goal of your association?
Well, I would agree on that, especially on a short-term goal. Is also just to have places where we can be Swedish unapologetically, and live and breathe our culture, our language, which is today more difficult in especially in the big cities. And it's also that our culture, our history, our identity is really looked down upon from mass media, from I would say from most political parties, and it's usually considered a bit stupid or lame or even racist, just being Swedish and celebrate Swedish traditions and trying to keep some kind of traditional values alive. So in the short term, it's just the possibility to live closer to each other, help each other, and build this kind of communities where our culture, our identity is the norm, where our children can grow up in that kind of community. But on a longer term, as I said before, I see where this society is going, and the future will be worse than it is today, and we have to be prepared for that. And when I say that, it's so easy to think, oh, civil war or something like that. I don't know if that will happen. I just know that the things that people count on today in Sweden, like healthcare, school system, police, and so on, we already see that this is starting to fall apart. And I don't see that going in any other direction. So we have to build these parallel institutions, this parallel society, while we still can, so that when the Swedish state, um, becomes even more powerless, and they pull away from the rural areas, we already have parallel institutions ready to replace them. Um, and I do believe that when that happens, there will be a big line of people queuing up to move to our areas, because the other areas won't work. The mixed areas won't work, or you will have to live under the rule of a clan or a mosque or some criminal gang of some sorts, which is already the reality in a few areas around the big cities. So that I would say is in the long run. Of course, my dream is still that we would have a Swedish Sweden and we would take back our whole country. I just don't see that happening in my lifetime, and I want to give the coming generations the best possible foundation to continue building from, so that they can make it reality in the future. If that takes 800 years, like the Reconquista in Spain, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is that we look at what can we do today to give the coming generations a better possibility than we had.
Right. Yeah, I basically agree. What happens at a national scale, to a certain extent, is out of our hands. We can try to influence it in one direction or another, but the most important thing is preserving your people in purity somewhere so that they're prepared to then take advantage of situations that do emerge in the future, and of course, to slowly and steadily expand. So, with Return to the Land, as actual kind of physical intentional communities, our number one priority politically is securing our right to free association, and specifically when it comes to private associations managing land in our particular arrangement, it would behoove us to try to establish relationships with lawmakers on a state level and ensure that they support our right to do this, maybe add some language to bills here and there, stipulating like this kind of private association ought to be interpreted to have this right, because there's a lot of legal ambiguity. It's sort of a gray area. Practically the whole law these days is a gray area, and it's all just a battle of lawyers. Like there is no law, there's just lawyers in the modern day, which is unfortunate because they're so expensive and we don't have a lot of lawyers on our side. But anyway, that's sort of the political objective that Return to the Land isn't itself directly seeking, but that's the most important thing for us. Secure our right to exist in our own kind of self-contained, pure communities so that we can exist in the future. What does that look like in Sweden? You said you have strong anti-discrimination laws. So, and you don't have, like contiguous intentional communities like we do to try to preserve or protect. So, what kind of, legal surety are you looking for? And if you could, say have one law passed or repeal one law or just, achieve one thing at the national scale, what would that be that would secure your existence?
Yeah, this is a very good question, because what we see in Sweden right now is that they want to change the which is called a basic law, which is more or less our constitution in Sweden. They want to change it because right now you can't forbid an organization in Sweden. So that's very, and it's been something I've been really proud of, because it's like you can put individuals in prison, but you can't ban an organization. So when you look at Germany, for example, they ban nationalist organizations almost every day. But in Sweden, you can't ban an organization. Now they want to change that. Of course, they use like, yeah, we have to stop them Muslim terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to change the constitution so that we can ban organizations and we can ban supporting criminal organizations. You get this kind of language in law, which is really, really difficult. And the worst thing is this comes from the Sweden Democrats. And this is typical, the typical problem of the populists. Uh, because for the common Swede, it sounds like a good idea. It's like, yeah, I don't like Muslim terrorists. Let's ban them. Yeah, but we all know what will happen in the future if this law is passed. So that is something we've been fighting and try to uh, form an opinion around like public opinion, but also to work with our contacts in the Sweden Democrats to get them to think in better ways. I think this will already happen in 1 year, but and it won't affect us, the first year, the first 10 years, the first 20 years. But who knows what will happen with the society in 20 years? Who will be in power? What kind of problems we will see and how they will view us then. So that's really something we are fighting against. I'm sad to say I think we can't stop it. And we need to find other ways to work around it. So what we're also doing, we are right now restructuring a bit to become more decentralized, to make it harder in that way that if it's all just in one organization and you can ban that organization, they could theoretically and in practice confiscate all our property then. So look at different ways to decentralize and make it harder to, so if they ban one part, the others could continue and so on. And I mean, these are the kind of things you don't want to put energy into. I want to keep building, open up new houses and stuff. But a lot of time is to just try to navigate all the laws coming. But that's really one of the main things. For us, it's also been a problem. We lost our bank account, and it was really, really hard for us to open a new one. Had to form a limited company and open a bank account through that company because our association was not allowed to open an account anymore. These kind of things that makes life harder. So that's also like a law that we have been lobbying for, is that the right to a bank account for organizations, and this is debated on a lower level. We will see if we can have some progress there as well.
Hmm. Do you have lawyers on your side?
We do. We don't have as many as we had hoped, and sometimes we have to go and look for external lawyers, which is very, very expensive, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And depends on their expertise. But we have a few who has been helping us, especially when it comes to permits around building on property and how we can develop our properties and so on. who have done it pro bono. So that's been very good.
Right. So you said that slow and steady is better and worrying about the quality over quantity is significant. However, I think it is a shame, you're running one of the largest actual membership organizations that I'm aware of in our spheres, and yet online, very few people are aware of you, which is it's just a shame. I mean, people should be aware of the work that you are doing, not just for your own, renown, but also because it's a model to follow. So, what do you think of that disconnect? By the way, I'm seeing some people ask questions in the YouTube chat. We do want to show our support for Dan. Super chats will be split here. And of course, anything that goes my way will ultimately benefit Return of the Land as well. We need to show our support. But on that point, there's kind of a disconnect between the online right, which has a certain set of concerns, and they usually dovetail with those concerns that do well with the algorithms. They're things that engage our attention, either pictures of pretty girls or, young girls being attacked by migrants or something violent or something, salacious, sensational. That keeps us kind of hooked, or it's the news cycle, which ultimately is not up to us. Every week, this set of stories is pumped around the country by mainstream media, and the people who are successful on social media tend simply to ride on that and tap into those trending topics. So there are all sorts of perverse incentives for the online right to be effectively totally captured by social media company algorithms and the mainstream media news cycle. Do you think that this is an issue? And are you also kind of conscious of this disconnect between the online right and then the people who are actually doing something on the ground?
I think it's a huge issue. We used to have like a daily live stream where we commented on the current news, and we had a big reach. It was in Swedish, of course, so you wouldn't have noticed, but we reached a lot of people. But after we did that for a couple of years actually, and we just realized that we are, it's like this loop that we are just repeating the same things. Oh, now there was a rape there or a riot there and somebody got murdered there, and there's all this doom things, and it's some weird masochistic thing that white people like to hear about how bad everything is, and some way that triggers the algorithms and so on. So, but we stopped that. It's more than a year ago, and said we need to focus on building. We can't focus on this, and that meant that we reached fewer people. Hopefully, we reach better people today. But there are, to me, it's quite interesting to see these anonymous accounts online with hundreds of thousands of followers and a lot of engagement, who are just reposting, crime news and saying, "Oh, that's terrible." So, okay, thank you
Yeah.
for your insightful commentary. And I truly believe that most Swedes are very well aware of the problems we have. The Sweden Democrats, which is what people think they should vote for, they are the biggest party among Swedish men. They are not the biggest party among Swedish women. That's another discussion. And they are by far the biggest party in Swedish working class men. And people know about the problem. I meet with so-called normies almost every day, and they vote for the old parties, but they are very well aware of the problems. The thing is, the nationalists have been really bad at explaining or showing an attractive solution. Right now we have this big remigration push, which I guess started with Martin Sellner in Austria, and trying to talking about a political solution. I'm all for that political solution. I just don't think the messaging is that attractive to the average person yet. Maybe that will change.
Mm.
That's why we are doing what we are doing. We are trying to create a micro version of the society we want to see. Of course, we are far away from what we want to reach. We're still in the early days. We're still learning. Uh, but my hope is that these areas that we are now, active in, and where we are developing land and properties, that they can be like beacons of hope, and show that, look, this is what Sweden also can be. This is a different path we can take. And for 100 years, the Swedish nationalist movement, since the 1920s, have been right about almost every issue. No, doesn't matter if we were right or not. We have had all the statistics on our side. We have had great magazines, beautiful leaflets. We had the biggest and most glorious banners. Didn't change anything because it was we didn't show an alternative. If you compare that how the left has worked in Sweden, the social democrat and the communists and so on, they, if I go in Stockholm, I can choose hundreds of bookstores, restaurants, community centers, and so on for left-wing people. They are in the most attractive parts of the city. Uh, they have a whole movement. Of course, all of this is taxpayer funded, but that's another problem that we have to face. But they have a whole movement that when you join it, you are almost certain of having a job inside it, because they have so many different organizations and so on. So just join the movement and you're almost set for life. You won't be unemployed anymore. You won't have to go back to the factory and work a hard job. You can just get taxpayer money and I don't know, write stupid reports or whatever. So they have this, I would say, many way a parallel community or society which is morphed with the mainstream society. And in this time, during these 100 years of being right, having statistics on our side and so on, we've built nothing. There's been nothing to go to, nothing to really be a part of. I mean, the last 20 years, it's been mostly online, and before that, it was like, shady meeting points and underground things. But as a regular Swede, it was not that you could just walk into a bookstore and see our books and meet a nationalist who was a decent, normal human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is the unfortunate truth. We have not built institutions where ordinary people can participate and see us as ordinary folks. The image in the mind of the average American of a white nationalist is a neo Nazi that's dressed up like he's part of the Third Reich. And yeah, it's this issue of hyperpolarization. I think it applies to all communities, but especially I think it's vicious in that dynamic between the people we're trying to help and our own communities. When you have a community on social media, what succeeds within that community is typically the more extreme version of that ideology. So the successful nationalists will be the ones pushing things like remigration. Send them all back is really attractive to people in our circles, but we are just losing touch with the ordinary person and what they actually value. They're on the left usually because there's some positive impetus to be compassionate. We don't want to kick people out of our country. We want to be accepting of people. And if you build your own thing, you're asking for your right to exist and mind your own business. Just like, the refugee, the leftist sees them as asking for their right to make it in the world and just, try to be a decent person like everyone else. They want to extend that sympathy, empathy, and it's misplaced clearly. But we can also get that same sympathy, empathy if we shift that, we're all marching or goose stepping around and reading Mein Kampf. If we have that vision that we want our own communities, we want to preserve our heritage, we don't want to impose what we're doing on other people by force, but then online, if you promote that message, then all of the hardliners will say you're cucking out, you are, a coward, even though they're the anonymous one. You and I are the ones with membership organizations numbering in the hundreds, and and yet the person online who is there on X 24/7, many of whom I'm convinced are simply Mossad agents put into our discourse intentionally to steer it in a direction that has no possibility of success. So it's a very discouraging thing. But we have another half hour or so here, and we'll have to go. Any last questions for Dan? Again, show support for our guys. It is very frustrating when you're building real things and affecting real people's lives, but there is this disconnect between what is appreciated and talked about online, which is mostly just feeding into that news cycle, feeding into the social media hyperpolarized landscape, and then what actually makes a difference in people's lives. So what about that kind of personal aspect of it? Like, how has your own life been affected, and those close to you? What personality changes, development, how are you being affected as people by all of this?
Well, I would say, you know, building this community and being around people with who share your values. I mean, we are not like purity spiraling about, you have to be in exactly this ideology, or we have some core values as nationalists which we all agree on, and then we can disagree on other subjects. Doesn't really matter, but just being around these people most of the time, and that our families, there are a lot of women and children as well, that can get together, has of course enriched our lives. Before I moved here and before we bought the house, I lived in Germany. My wife is actually German, so it's some sort of race mixing, I guess. um, and I lived for the last years in a small village in former Eastern Germany in Thuringia, which was because this is something people have to know as well. These kind of things happen a lot under the radar. So where we were living was a village more or less run by nationalists. So the local pub was owned by a nationalist, the local bakery was owned by a nationalist. There was a lot of nationalist families in the village or in the surrounding villages. And we had a great community. That was, of course, a big inspiration to what we are doing here. But they had no homepage, they had no social media presence. They just, many of them, especially the men, they were former activists in political parties and so on, who decided to move closer together and start businesses together and try to raise their children together in a community way. And this was what I saw what's happening there. As I said, we had these live streams, and were always talking about why is nobody doing something like this in Sweden, until we realized that we have to do it ourselves. Um, I've been lucky enough to be able to live in these kind of communities for, I would say, around 10 years now. So first in Germany, and then what we are building in Sweden. And to me, that has been the best decision of my life. Of course, what you also will encounter, as especially as a public figure, and you know this as well, you have the hit pieces and smearing and mainstream media, which can be quite tough on the families. You have children who have to go to public school, and maybe they will hear something from the teachers, or we haven't had that much of a problem with that, but there's always this kind of downside of being a public figure. I think this is also, you mentioned these anonymous online people. What they have to understand is that people like you and me, I mean, I've been a public nationalist for more than 20 years. um, I've always, I've never written under another fake name or anything like that. uh, what we say and what we do, we have to take full responsibility for that. Anonymous people online, they can, be so radical and cool and, write whatever they want. And if things get tough, they just create a new user, and, nobody knows who they were from the beginning anyway. Um, I think it's crucial that people understand that in order for us to even have a movement worth talking about, we need public people, public figures, and you need to support them, because it's okay that you have to be anonymous. Can be several reasons for that. But if you're anonymous and you still want to see something happen, you have a duty to help the people who are taking all the heat, financially, or if you have any special set of skills where you can help. Um, Otherwise, this will never succeed in any way at all. We can't build a movement on just anonymous people. That's impossible. Of course, you can build a really cool group on social media, but you will not have a real life impact, and not a long lasting one, without people ready to stand up and take the heat and um, you know defend our ideas and values in the public debate. And these people need to be supported and guarded in all ways that we can. I always come back to this. Before, I've always found it hard to talk about this because it sounds like begging for money. That's not the point of it. The point is that everyone has to understand their role. And if you are not the public figure taking the heat, then your role is to support the guys and gals taking the heat.
Yeah, no, it's very true. If you're willing to be a leader and put yourself out there, well, then you have the right to criticize and complain about existing leadership. If you're not willing to do it, you better
Mm.
follow someone who is. Because otherwise, we have no organization, we have no movement, we're uncoordinated, and we'll be destroyed by our enemies, root and branch. And it's very real, it's happening now. So yeah, it is up to the people who see that, who can grasp that, to set the example as well. The people who have done at least something on our side. Maybe you are writing articles anonymously, and that's something that you're doing. That's great, but we can't be complacent with what we've already been doing. I'm sure, like Dan is a person, he's done more than 99% of anyone out there in this chat or who's going to see this stream in the future. And yet, I guarantee you, Dan is thinking every day, like, what else can I be doing? What more can I be doing? I'm right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Of
always
course.
feel that I don't do enough.
Yeah, and that has to be all of our attitude. And we're not all going to do the same amount. We can't all be in it quite to the same extent. But if you think, well, I'm doing better than most, so therefore now I can kind of rest on my laurels, I did my part, it doesn't work like that. Because as soon as you take that attitude, in a way, it's just then that everyone below you, in terms of the competence hierarchy and the engagement hierarchy, they're all going to take the same tack because you're setting the example. So if you just sit back and think that the people above you then are going to take care of it, you're not going to get that support beneath you, and it all stems from our attitude. So we will hit the super chats, and then I'd really like to kind of get your personal kind of spiritual perspective, because I think that's ultimately where all of this comes from, where we have the strength to keep going. What is that connection to the divine or the sacred, in your conception? But first, we'll go ahead and Sun Circles sends $15. Thank you very much. Have you guys looked into Weston A. Price's works on nutrition and development? I think one of our biggest advantages in the future will be health, beauty, and intelligence, better developed offspring. The costs of animal based nutrition will be well worth the improved human capital eventually. Well, that's an interesting question. I've not looked into Price's work, but I am thinking of starting a farm co op, an agricultural co op within Return to the Land, so that we can have high quality, organic, no hormone beef. And that's something that's very achievable. But yeah, what about you? Have you heard of Weston A. Price, or what do you think of diet, nutrition, all of that?
No, I haven't. I haven't heard about his work, so I can't really comment on that. In our second house in southern Sweden, we have quite a lot of land which members can use. They can have a plot and to have their own little farm thing going on there, vegetables and potatoes and so on. So that's like a small project that we have. Of course, I find these questions important. For us, it's been also around our village. There's a lot of farms, so we have built great connections with the farmers, which means that when you come to one of our events, usually the meat is from a local farm, the milk and egg as well, and most of the vegetables are grown just around the corner. So we try to think about these kind of things. Yes.
Yeah. In a way, everything else is downstream from diet, nutrition, exercise, because if you aren't healthy, you're not going to think straight. You're not going to address these problems correctly. I mean, that's just the kind of life cycle. And people, well, actually, online, people are more attuned to the nutrition advice and diet recommendations than they are, for example, to the community aspect. But it's just kind of uh, ironic that we spend all this time thinking about very high level abstract ideas and think that the important thing is to debate about like National Socialism versus National Bolshevism, or what kind of, whatever it is, or, what talking points we should use. Really, it's like, how are you living? What's your
Mm.
diet like? Are you married? Are you having children? And all of that foundational stuff, like, you can't, the rest of it is all talk. The rest of it is kind of a farce if you're not living the way you're supposed to be living. I'm excited for that agricultural co-op project that we are getting started with. I think it's really good that you have that, and I'm looking forward. Do you have any like clips of that in action? Do you share on social media what's going on?
Not yet. This will, because next we bought this house and this property last year, and I don't know if you have know this, but the main building was firebombed by the Antifa, which has, so most of last year has been about renovating and building a new house and so on. And I know that the guys in southern Sweden this year, they started this project, so I guess next year we will see the first crops and so on, and that will be really interesting, and I will share it with everybody in our
Yeah,
social media then.
awesome. That'll look great. I mean, the Swedish countryside in the spring and the summer is incredible. I've never been
Yeah.
there, but I've seen plenty of images, and I would definitely like to visit. So, if there are any other questions, go ahead and ask them at the entropy link. I'll drop it one more time. I really want to stress again this, like, everyone has to be involved. We can have a false sense of complacency when we see posts that are sympathetic with our worldview getting a million views. But you got to think that a million views equates ordinarily to less than 100,000 likes. So there's kind of a rule of tenths that I like to talk about. You go from a million views to 100,000 likes to maybe 10,000 replies. Now, if you know that you want to spread this message, you should like and reply because that boosts the algorithm. And it's very little effort. But then beyond that point, like there's another rule of tenths, the number of people who will reply versus the number of people who will donate. You go from 10,000 to maybe 1,000. 1,000 people will donate, mostly small scale donations. That's from 1,000,000 starting out. And of those people that will donate, how many people will get actively involved and spend time, serious time, engaging in an organization? Maybe 100. Now, of that 100, what percent is willing to move and change their lifestyle and really be part of the core of a movement? 10. So you go from 1,000,000 people are out there on our side to maybe 10 people show up on a consistent basis and make a difference. So we can't be lulled into a false sense of security by the numbers that we see on social media. That is not reflective of the reality. The reality is we can do amazing things if people like Dan and myself and the Woodlander in England are supported. There's really no end to what we can do, but we have to normalize everyone doing their part. So again, you have basically one last chance to ask a super chat question at the entropy link. If not, then my final question is related to spirituality. First of all, in Free Sweden, do you have Christians and pagans? Is it kind of tolerant of different European spiritualities? And then I want to ask about your personal views.
Yeah, so in the organization, we have both Christians and pagans on the board as well. The rule that we have is that we won't allow any atheists on our board, on our board, yeah, as board members. As everyone can become a member, we don't, control if they are atheists or not. But this is an important subject for us. And as I said, this coming weekend we have one of our biggest yearly traditions where we honor our forefathers, which is a very spiritual event. What we have done is that we have been able to get Christians and pagans under the same roof. Of course, the pagan religion or belief is quite big in Sweden, especially among nationalists. And Christianity has had a really bad time in Sweden, especially since most of us, when you were born in Sweden up until the year 2000, you automatically became a member of the Swedish church. And the Swedish church is not a Christian church anymore. It's a, I don't know, satanistic, some kind of whatever. It's run by politicians. I mean, we have a church election where political parties run for power of the church. Was just a few weeks ago. So you have these really weird LGBT parties going on in the church, and they are openly anti-Swedish. And the former archbishop, she said that Jesus Christ is not the only way to God, and all these weird things, that you have to question if they are really a Christian church. But what we have done, so we have in our movement, we have a Christian church and we have a pagan association. And this celebration that we have on Saturday is, I would say, in many ways combining those both. And it might sound heretical for both sides, but this has been really important because this has been a divide inside the nationalist movement for such a long time. And that's one of our core fundamental rules for our members on how they have to behave, is that they have to respect members of different faith. And of course, I'm not now talking about the faith that is traditionally a part of our people, not other faiths. So this is it is a big part of it, and it has been something that we got a lot of criticism for in the beginning, because the Swedish nationalist movement, the modern nationalist movement, has been, if not atheist, at least anti-religious in many ways, and especially anti-Christian. But I think that we have succeeded in bringing back a spiritual way of looking at life, and to bring back some kind of respect between pagans and Christian, at least inside our organization. But it's really not easy, and I wouldn't say that we are. It's an ongoing work to keep these people from not killing each other at the meetings.
Yeah. I know what that's
Yeah.
like. Yeah, Return to the Land is the same way. I think that that's the model for success. We have to prioritize our people and get over religious differences to some extent. Now, I think the most important thing about a religion, though, is that it gives you individually the strength that you need, the willpower that you need to keep going, because you see ultimate meaning in what you're doing. For my part, it's kind of easy to straddle that line. I'm almost primarily a Platonist. Philosophy has always been more important to me, and there's a Platonic heritage in Christianity. There's also, of course, well, Plato himself was a Hellenistic pagan. Um, and so I practice that on a weekly basis with my courses. I'm constantly reading these sources. I'm thinking of questions of virtue and my obligations ethically. And that's just kind of how I've addressed it. But there are many other ways of addressing your spirituality. Some people, they have ways of summoning their vril, and that's a source of strength for them. Uh, so, how do you use your spiritual view or practice to give you strength to keep going?
So I will start by saying that I'm not part of any organized religion. And I find it quite hard. Both of my children are baptized Christian, but we don't go like to church every Sunday. We go there more or less for Christmas, for funerals and weddings. Um, but I feel a big connection to the Swedish old pagan um, faith or lifestyle, or whatever you want to call it. I've always been a bit of a a searching soul, trying to find a way. I've always believed in God. In German, you say Gottgläubig, so it's believer in God, more or less. Without ever feeling home in the Christian church or in like the pagan associations we have in Sweden. So I it's weird. I take part in both, but also in none in some way. But it is an important part of my life still, and these kind of traditions that we work out, like this coming weekend, is really a way of me to also, fuel my inner strength, and feel closer to both heaven and earth, and my forefathers, and so on. And But yeah, so I'm not part of any organized religion. Have never been. I've been to a lot of ceremonies, and I've been to Catholic mass. I've been to our evangelical and Protestant churches here, but never really felt home anywhere, I would say.
Mm. But of course, your mission in creating these communities is something that you think has spiritual significance, connects you with your ancestors.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, how would you describe that, I guess, feeling? Like, what does it mean to connect with that sense of purpose? Because I think that's ultimately what holds a lot of people back. They can understand that something significant and important, like demographic change and what's happening to our people, but it never connects at the level of the heart. And I think that's what makes the difference between those who act on this and make a difference and those who don't. So you make a difference, therefore it must impact you somehow where it counts. So
Absolutely, and I would say just by just by studying the struggle of my forefathers and also the struggle of former nationalists has made me realize that I am connected to them in ways, more ways than just materialistic. And a big turning point for me was like 20 years ago when I read Corneliu Codreanu's For My Legionaries. Of course, he was an Romanian Orthodox Christian, but the way he described his connection with God really resonated with me. And I remember I held a speech 15, 16 years ago at the place where Codreanu was murdered after he was imprisoned, and then he was taken out in the forest, and then he was murdered by the communists. I was taking part in a Romanian memorial march on his death day out to this place, and I held a speech there, and I said that because I've read the Bible, I've been to I've been to church many times, but nothing has made me understand the connection between heaven and earth, between us and God, more than reading Codreanu's For My Legionaries. There was something that just clicked, even though it didn't bring me to the Orthodox Church, but it made me closer to my forefathers and to the struggle. I could see and feel that they had been a part of the same struggle as I'm a part of today. And therefore, I also could understand that what I'm doing today can impact and will impact future generations who will continue this struggle. And that also made my life at the same time more important and less important. So it made it more important because I had to use the time I have to do the best I can. But it doesn't matter if I can pick the fruits from it, if I will see, the victory of our people. That's not the point of it. And that really changed the way how I was. Before that, I was really chasing, the fast results, elections or more followers on social media or whatever, how you count your success, into really understanding that I'm just playing my part in this, as I see it, eternal battle between good and evil. I'm playing my part, and I have to play it as good as I can, but I'm not playing it for me. I'm playing it for, doing my part in this eternal struggle.
Yeah, I think that's the attitude that anyone who is a man of history ultimately has to take on, and that's really the scale of it. It's like your life compared to all of history, compared to your ancestors, is a small thing, and yet that huge heritage has to pass through your small life. So although by comparison, like as an individual, you're not that consequential. No one is. Even big historical figures as individuals aren't that consequential. Like no one cares that much about Napoleon's romances. I mean, people talk about them, but like his actual life, day to day, is not consequential. What matters is that tide of history that sweeps through the person, and you have to connect with that if you're going to steward our shared heritage, and also just to get that sense of meaning. Christian, pagan, whatever it is, whatever angle you approach it from, and however truthful or mistaken you may be in your spiritual views, that sense, that feeling connected to a larger thing, that's what keeps us going. It has to. So anyway, this has been a really good conversation. Tog says thanks and donates $30. So thank you very much, Tog. This has again been fascinating. Everyone go follow Dan on X if you want to share your X handle and any other social media that you use.
Yeah, so on X, I'm Eriksson Dan, so the other way around, last name, first name. And I also have an English language Substack with a podcast called Beyond Collapse, which you can find on english.daneriksson.com. So follow that for more stuff in English. If you speak Swedish, of course, detfriasverige.se, but that made no sense in English, so only the right people will understand it.
All right. Well, I think it's great what you're doing. Hopefully, you can come speak for our
Likewise.
next
Yeah.
intentional community conference. That'll be happening sometime later this winter. And yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great day. Take care.